Director Lisa Martinez was exhausted. It had been one of those endless Washington days that seemed to stretch on forever. The intelligence briefing at headquarters had run 3 hours longer than planned, and now it was past 11 at night. All she wanted was to get home to her quiet suburban house, pour herself a glass of wine, and forget about the national security threats that kept her awake most nights. Her government-issued black sedan hummed quietly along the empty highway. The radio played soft jazz, and for the first time all day, Lisa felt her shoulders start to relax. She thought about her daughter's college graduation next month and smiled. Despite all the chaos of her job, some things in life were still perfect. That's when she noticed the headlight in her rearview mirror. The police car had appeared out of nowhere, its bright lights cutting through the darkness behind her. Lisa glanced at her speedometer. She was going exactly the speed limit, as always. Her hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as the patrol car moved closer. Officer David Thompson had been having a rough night, too. 2 domestic violence calls, a drunk driver who nearly took out a family of 4, and now he was dealing with a car that had been weaving slightly between lanes. The black sedan looked expensive. Probably some rich guy who thought the rules didn't apply to him. David had seen it all before. He flicked on his emergency lights and watched as the car immediately pulled over to the shoulder. At least this one was cooperating. David radioed in the stop to dispatch, reading off the license plate number as he approached the vehicle. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual. Lisa saw the flashing red and blue lights fill her car and felt her heart skip a beat. She had been pulled over maybe twice in her entire life, both times for minor speeding tickets when she was younger. She carefully steered to the side of the road and put the car in park, her mind racing through what she might have done wrong. She rolled down her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel where the officer could see them. Her FBI training kicked in automatically. Stay calm, be respectful, follow instructions. She had taught these same principles to countless agents over the years. David walked up to the driver's side window, his flashlight beam dancing across the dark pavement. The car was definitely expensive, some kind of government vehicle by the look of it. As he got closer, he could see the driver was a woman, middle-aged, professional-looking. She had her hands on the wheel, which was good. Most people didn't know to do that. "Good evening, ma'am," David said, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years on the force. "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" Lisa turned slightly to face him, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "No, officer, I don't. Was I speeding?" Her voice was calm and polite, exactly the way she had been trained to interact with law enforcement. "Your left taillight is out," David explained, shining his flashlight toward the back of the car. "I need to see your license, registration, and proof of insurance." Lisa nodded. "Of course. My license is in my purse, and the registration should be in the glove compartment." She paused for a moment. "Officer, I should mention that I'm a federal employee. I'm going to reach for my credentials first, if that's okay." David's expression changed slightly. Federal employee could mean anything. Could be some desk worker from the Department of Agriculture, or could be something more serious. "Okay, but move slowly and tell me what you're doing." Lisa reached carefully into her jacket pocket where she kept her FBI identification. The leather wallet felt familiar in her fingers. She had carried it for over 20 years, through every promotion, every crisis, every late night just like this one. "I'm reaching for my FBI credentials," she said clearly, pulling out the wallet. But in the darkness, with just the beam of his flashlight to see by, David saw something different. The quick movement toward the jacket, the mention of federal employee, the expensive car. His training screamed at him that this could be a weapon. He had been taught that traffic stops were one of the most dangerous parts of police work. Officers died during routine stops all the time. "Stop, let me see your hands," David shouted, his own hand moving instinctively to his service weapon. Lisa froze, her FBI wallet halfway out of her pocket. She could hear the change in the officer's voice, the sudden tension that meant things were about to go very wrong. "Officer, it's just my identification. I'm FBI Director Lisa Martinez." But David was no longer listening to her words. All he could process was the potential threat in front of him. His weapon was out now, pointed directly at her. "Get out of the car, now keep your hands where I can see them." Lisa's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was every federal agent's nightmare, but it felt surreal to be living it herself. She slowly opened the car door and stepped out, her hands raised high above her head. "Turn around. Face the car," David commanded, his voice shaking slightly with adrenaline. Lisa did as she was told, pressing her palms against the roof of her sedan. The metal was cold against her skin. She could hear David behind her calling for backup on his radio. His voice was urgent, reporting a possible armed federal impersonator. "Officer Thompson," she said, reading his name tag when he had approached the window. "I am FBI Director Lisa Martinez. My identification is in my jacket pocket. If you'll just let me show you." "Stop talking," David ordered. He was behind her now, and she could feel the weight of his presence. This had escalated far, beyond anything he had expected. A federal director? That seemed impossible. But people impersonated law enforcement all the time. He couldn't take any chances. The handcuffs clicked around Lisa's wrist with a sound that seemed to echo in the quiet night. She had put handcuffs on suspects countless times during her career, but feeling them on her own wrists was something entirely different. The metal bit into her skin, and she realized she was shaking. "Officer, please check my credentials," she said one more time, her voice quieter now. "This is all a misunderstanding." David's hands were shaking too as he secured the handcuffs. He could see other patrol cars approaching in the distance, their lights flashing through the darkness. He had called for backup, and now he was committed to this course of action. There was no going back. As Lisa stood there against her car, hands cuffed behind her back, she thought about how this moment would change everything. Not just for her, but for the relationship between federal and local law enforcement. Not just for Officer Thompson, but for every police officer who would see this story on the news tomorrow. The dash cam in David's patrol car had been recording everything from the moment he turned on his emergency lights. Every word, every movement, every second of this encounter was being captured in digital memory. Neither of them knew it yet, but that recording would soon be seen by millions of people around the world. In less than 10 minutes, a routine traffic stop had become something that would make national headlines and change 2 lives forever. Lisa Martinez woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop on her nightstand. It was 6 in the morning, and she had barely slept 3 hours. The events of the previous night felt like a bad dream, but the soreness in her wrist from the handcuffs reminded her it was all too real. Her assistant was calling, then her deputy director, then the Attorney General's office. By the time she stumbled to her kitchen to make coffee, her phone had received 47 missed calls and over 200 text messages. The dashcam video was everywhere. Someone had leaked it overnight, and now the footage of FBI Director Lisa Martinez being handcuffed on the side of a highway was playing on every news channel in America. The video was crystal clear, showing every moment from when Officer David Thompson approached her car to when backup officers finally checked her credentials and realized their mistake. Lisa sat at her kitchen table watching herself on television. The woman in the video looked so small and vulnerable, nothing like the powerful federal director she was supposed to be. She watched David Thompson's hands shake as he pointed his weapon at her. She watched herself being forced against the car, her voice barely audible as she tried to explain who she was. The morning news shows were having a field day. Pundits debated whether Lisa had done something to provoke the officer. Social media was exploding with opinions from people who had never been in either position. Some supported her, calling it obvious police misconduct. Others questioned whether she had been aggressive or threatening in some way the video didn't show. 20 miles away, David Thompson was sitting in his own kitchen staring at the same footage. His wife had her hand on his shoulder, but he barely felt it. His 3 kids were still asleep upstairs, completely unaware that their father had become the most hated police officer in America overnight. His phone was buzzing too, but for very different reasons. Death threats were pouring in through social media. Someone had found his home address and posted it online. His wife was crying as She read message after message from strangers calling him every name imaginable. "David, you need to turn the phone off," his wife whispered. "This is insane." But David couldn't look away. The video showed everything, but it didn't show what was going through his mind in those moments. It didn't show the training that taught him to treat every traffic stop as potentially life-threatening. It didn't show the 3 officers who had been killed during routine stops just that year. It didn't show his fear. Police Chief Robert Williams called an emergency press conference at 8 in the morning. David had been suspended pending a full investigation. The department was cooperating fully with federal authorities. Officer Thompson was a 15-year veteran with a clean record, except that last part wasn't entirely true. As reporters started digging deeper, they found things the department had hoped would stay buried. 3 excessive force complaints in the past 5 years. 2 settlements paid quietly to avoid lawsuits. David had a history of aggressive tactics, especially during traffic stops involving people of color or federal vehicles. Lisa tried to go to work that morning, but protesters had already gathered outside FBI headquarters. Some supported her, holding signs calling for police reform. Others blamed her, claiming she must have done something wrong to provoke such a reaction from the officer. Her security detail was nervous. This level of public attention on the FBI director was unprecedented. As she walked through the building, her own agents looked at her differently. Some with sympathy, others with embarrassment that their boss had been humiliated so publicly. The morning briefing was awkward. How do you discuss national security threats when video of your arrest is playing on every screen in America? Lisa tried to act normal, but everyone in the room had seen the footage. Everyone had watched her being handcuffed and searched like a common criminal. "Director, the media is requesting a statement," her communications director said carefully. "How do you want to handle this?" Lisa had been thinking about that question all morning. Part of her wanted to defend herself, to explain that she had done nothing wrong. But another part of her knew that anything she said would be dissected and analyzed endlessly. As the head of federal law enforcement, she had to be careful not to interfere with any investigation. Meanwhile, David was being escorted out of the police station by internal affairs officers. His badge and gun were taken away in a small ceremony that felt like a funeral. 15 years of service reduced to a cardboard box of personal items and a suspension notice. The other officers watched him leave in silence. Some felt bad for him, knowing that split-second decisions during traffic stops could go wrong for anyone. Others were angry that he had brought this attention to their department. The video made all of them look bad. David's partner, Officer Jennifer Walsh, was struggling with mixed emotions. She had worked with David for 3 years and never seen him act inappropriately. But the video was hard to argue with. The FBI director had been completely cooperative, and David had still escalated the situation to the point of drawing his weapon. "He's not a bad guy," Jennifer told reporters who cornered her in the parking lot. "But this whole thing is just terrible for everyone involved." The FBI's Internal Affairs Division was also launching their own investigation. They needed to determine if Lisa had followed proper protocol during the stop. Some agents were questioning whether she should have identified herself as FBI immediately before reaching for anything. Lisa found herself in the strange position of being both victim and subject of investigation. She had to give a detailed statement about her own arrest, describing the fear she felt when David drew his weapon, the humiliation of being handcuffed in front of passing motorists. "I kept thinking about my daughter," she told investigators. "What if she saw this video? What if something had gone wrong and I never made it home?" The story was getting bigger by the hour. Civil rights groups were calling for federal intervention. Police unions were defending David's actions as reasonable under the circumstances. Politicians were taking sides, making statements that had more to do with their own agendas than the facts of the case. David's family was falling apart. His teenage son was being bullied at school because of the video. His wife had to take time off work because protesters showed up at her office. His elderly mother called crying, asking what she had done wrong as a parent. "I was just doing my job," David told his wife that night as they sat in their darkened living room, curtains drawn to keep out the news cameras. "I thought she might have a weapon." I thought I was protecting myself. Lisa was having sleepless nights too. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw David's gun pointed at her face. She kept replaying the moment over and over, wondering if she could have done something differently to prevent the whole situation. The video had been viewed millions of times in just 24 hours. It was being analyzed frame by experts on television. Everyone had an opinion about those crucial minutes on the highway. But for Lisa and David, it wasn't about politics or policy debates. It was about two lives that had been completely turned upside down by a simple traffic stop that went horribly wrong. And this was just the beginning. Agent Michael Rivera had been investigating police misconduct cases for 12 years. But this one was different. When your own director is the victim, every detail matters twice as much. He sat in his office at the Justice Department, surrounded by boxes of files that painted a troubling picture of Officer David Thompson's career. The first complaint dated back 7 years. A young man named Anthony Williams had filed a report claiming David used excessive force during a traffic stop. Anthony was a college student driving home from his part-time job when David pulled him over for allegedly running a red light. According to the complaint, David had dragged Anthony from his car and slammed him against the hood for no apparent reason. The case had been quietly settled. Anthony received $15,000 and signed an agreement never to speak publicly about the incident. The police department's internal investigation found no wrongdoing. David received no punishment, not even a note in his permanent file. Agent Rivera picked up his phone and called Anthony's number. It took 3 rings before a nervous voice answered. "I saw the news about Director Martinez," Anthony said before Rivera could even introduce himself. "I've been waiting for someone to call me." They met at a coffee shop downtown. Anthony was now 28, working as an accountant, but his hands still shook slightly when he talked about that night 7 years ago. "I did everything right," Anthony explained, stirring his coffee absently. "Hands on the wheel, yes sir, no sir, the whole thing. But Officer Thompson seemed angry from the moment he walked up to my car, like he had already decided I was guilty of something." Anthony pulled out his phone and showed Rivera photos from that night. His face had been bruised, his shirt torn. The pictures had been part of his settlement agreement, evidence that was supposed to never see the light of day. He kept saying, "I was resisting arrest, but I wasn't. I was just scared." When someone that much bigger than you is screaming and grabbing you, your body reacts. But he called that resisting. Rivera took notes carefully. This wasn't just about one bad traffic stop anymore. This was about a pattern. The second complaint was harder to track down. Maria Santos had filed a report 3 years ago, but she had moved out of state and changed her phone number. Rivera finally reached her through her sister. Maria agreed to a video call, but she was reluctant to talk. She worked as a nurse now and didn't want any publicity. But when Rivera explained that her experience might help prevent others from going through the same thing, she opened up. "I was driving home from my night shift at the hospital," Maria said, her voice quiet through the computer speaker. "Officer, Thompson said I was speeding, but I know I wasn't. I'm always careful because I'm usually tired after 12-hour shifts." Maria's story was similar to Anthony's, a routine stop that escalated quickly. David had ordered her out of the car and searched it thoroughly, claiming he smelled marijuana. No drugs were found, but Maria ended up with bruised wrists and a torn uniform. "The worst part wasn't the physical stuff," Maria continued. "It was how powerless I felt. Here I am, someone who saves lives for a living, and this officer made me feel like a criminal. I filed the complaint because I thought other people should know. But nothing happened." Her case had also been quietly settled. Another agreement, another signature, another payment to make the problem disappear. Rivera was starting to see how the system worked. The police department had a pattern of protecting David Thompson even when the evidence was clear. But why? Chief Robert Williams was having his own crisis. Rivera had requested a meeting, and Williams knew it wasn't going to be pleasant. The FBI was asking questions about cases the department thought were long buried. "Agent Rivera, I want to be clear that we've always taken misconduct allegations seriously," Williams said, adjusting his tie nervously. Every complaint against Officer Thompson was thoroughly investigated. Rivera laid out the files on Williams' desk. Sir, with respect, these investigations seem designed to clear Officer Thompson rather than find the truth. None of these complainants were ever interviewed by Internal Affairs. None of the physical evidence was properly documented. Williams looked at the files like they might bite him. Officer Thompson has 15 years of service. He's received commendations for bravery. A few complaints don't define an entire career. A few complaints that all follow the same pattern, Rivera corrected. Traffic stops that escalate unnecessarily. Use of force against cooperative citizens, and then settlements to keep it quiet. Rivera pulled out another file. There's also the case of Robert Chen, the businessman who claimed Officer Thompson roughed him up during a traffic stop 2 years ago. Mr. Chen withdrew his complaint after he said he received threatening phone calls telling him to drop it. Williams shifted uncomfortably. I don't know anything about threatening phone calls. We're going to need all the records, Chief. All the complaints, all the settlements, all the internal communications about Officer Thompson. This isn't just about one incident anymore. David Thompson was sitting in his lawyer's office listening to things about his own career that he had tried to forget. His attorney, Janet Murphy, was explaining just how serious his situation had become. David, they have 3 previous complaints with similar patterns. They have settlement agreements that show the department knew there were problems, but chose to cover them up rather than address them. And now they have video evidence of you drawing your weapon on the FBI director. David rubbed his face with his hands. Those other cases were different. Those people were resisting arrest. They were being difficult. Were they? Janet asked, pointedly. Because Agent Rivera has talked to all of them and their stories don't match what's in your police reports. The truth was, David had convinced himself over the years that he was just doing his job. When people didn't immediately comply with his orders, he saw it as resistance. When they seemed nervous or asked questions, he interpreted it as suspicious behavior. His training had taught him to take control of every situation, and he had taken that lesson too far. I never meant to hurt anyone, David said quietly. I was just trying to be safe. The problem is that your version of being safe put other people in danger, Janet replied, and the department enabled that by covering up the complaints instead of getting you additional training or counseling. Lisa Martinez was dealing with her own investigation challenges. As the victim of David's actions, she was also under scrutiny. Some people were questioning whether she had somehow contributed to the escalation. Agent Rivera interviewed her for 3 hours, going over every detail of the traffic stop. Lisa was professional and thorough, but Rivera could see the emotional toll it was taking on her. Director, in your professional opinion, did Officer Thompson follow proper procedure during the stop? Rivera asked. Lisa paused before answering. Agent Rivera, I've been in law enforcement for over 20 years. I've been in dangerous situations where split-second decisions matter. But this wasn't one of those situations. I was completely cooperative. I identified myself clearly. Officer Thompson's decision to draw his weapon was not justified by anything I did. The investigation was expanding beyond just David Thompson. Rivera's team was looking at the entire police department's culture. They found evidence of other officers with similar complaint patterns. They discovered that the department's Internal Affairs Division was understaffed and undertrained. They learned that settlement agreements were being used routinely to avoid accountability. Captain Lisa Wong, who supervised David's unit, was called in for questioning. She had signed off on all the internal investigations that cleared David of wrongdoing. Captain Wong, did you personally review the evidence in Officer Thompson's cases? Rivera asked. Of course I did, she replied defensively. Every case that crosses my desk gets proper attention. Rivera showed her photos from Anthony Williams's case. Then how do you explain clearing Officer Thompson when there was photographic evidence of injuries to the complainant? Captain Wong stared at the photos, seeing them clearly for the first time. I was told these injuries occurred after the arrest, during booking. By who? By Officer Thompson and his partner at the time. Rivera made more notes. The corruption was deeper than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just one bad officer. It was a system that protected bad officers and silenced their victims. As word spread about the federal investigation, more people started coming forward. Citizens who had been afraid to complain before now felt safe to tell their stories. The FBI hotline was flooded with calls about not just David Thompson, but other officers in the department. The investigation that had started with a simple traffic stop was now exposing years of misconduct that had been systematically covered up. And everyone involved was beginning to realize that this was just the beginning. The courthouse was packed on the first day of David Thompson's trial. News vans lined the street outside, and protesters on both sides held signs supporting either the FBI director or the police officer. Inside, the atmosphere was tense as people filed into the courtroom that would decide David's fate. David sat at the defense table in a dark blue suit, looking nothing like the confident police officer he had been 6 months earlier. His wife held his hand tightly from the gallery behind him. Their 3 children stayed home from school, unable to face their classmates who had all seen the viral video. Prosecutor Rachel Adams stood to give her opening statement. She was a veteran federal prosecutor who had handled dozens of civil rights cases, but this one felt different. The whole country was watching. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice clear and strong. "This case is about a police officer who forgot that his job is to serve and protect, not to intimidate and harm. The evidence will show that David Thompson has a pattern of using excessive force against innocent citizens, and that on the night in question, he pointed a loaded weapon at the FBI director for no justifiable reason." Rachel walked closer to the jury box. "You will see the dash cam video of that night. You will watch as Director Lisa Martinez, a woman who has dedicated her life to law enforcement, is forced to the ground and handcuffed like a criminal. You will hear her voice as she calmly tries to identify herself while Officer Thompson ignores her words and escalates a simple traffic stop into a traumatic encounter. David's defense attorney, Janet Murphy, had a different story to tell. During her opening statement, she painted David as a dedicated officer who had made a split-second decision based on his training and experience. "Officer David Thompson is not a villain," Janet told the jury. "He is a 15-year veteran of law enforcement who has put his life on the line every day to protect this community. On that night, he was faced with a situation that seemed dangerous. Someone claiming to be a federal agent reaching into their jacket in the dark. His training taught him to prepare for the worst-case scenario." Janet gestured toward David. "Ladies and gentlemen, police officers have to make life-or-death decisions in seconds. They don't have the luxury of hindsight that we have in this courtroom. Officer Thompson believed he was facing a potential threat, and he responded accordingly. That's not a crime. That's survival." The first week of testimony focused on David's history. Anthony Williams, now 28 and working as an accountant, took the stand to describe his encounter with David 7 years earlier. His voice shook as he recounted being pulled from his car and slammed against the hood. "I kept asking what I had done wrong," Anthony testified. "But Officer Thompson just kept yelling at me to stop resisting. I wasn't resisting, I was scared." Under cross-examination, Janet Murphy tried to paint Anthony as uncooperative. She pointed out inconsistencies between his testimony and the police report from that night, but Anthony stood firm. "The police report says I was aggressive and threatening," Anthony said. "But I'm 5'6" and weigh 130 pounds. Officer Thompson is 6'2" and probably weighs twice as much. How exactly was I threatening to him?" Maria Santos testified via video link from her new home in Colorado. She described her traffic stop 3 years earlier, how David had searched her car claiming to smell marijuana that wasn't there, how he had left her with bruised wrists and a torn uniform. "I saved lives every day as a nurse," Maria said, her voice steady despite the obvious emotion. "But Officer Thompson made me feel like I was worthless, like I was a criminal just for existing." The prosecution also called Dr. James Park, an expert on police procedures and use of force. Dr. Park had reviewed the dash cam video dozens of times and compared David's actions to standard police training. Officer Thompson's decision to draw his weapon was not justified by the circumstances, Dr. Park testified. Director Martinez was cooperative, identified herself clearly, and posed no apparent threat. Drawing a weapon should be a last resort, not a first response. But the defense had their own expert. Retired Police Captain William Foster had 30 years of experience and a different perspective on the video. Police officers are taught that traffic stops are inherently dangerous, Captain Foster explained to the jury. When someone mentions being a federal agent and reaches into their clothing, an officer has to assume the worst. Officer Thompson's response was consistent with his training. The most anticipated testimony came in the second week when Lisa Martinez took the stand. The courtroom was completely silent as she walked to the witness box. This was the first time many people had seen her speak publicly about the incident. Prosecutor Adams led Lisa through the events of that night step by step. Lisa's voice was calm and professional as she described driving home from work, seeing the police car behind her, and pulling over for what she thought would be a routine traffic stop. When I told Officer Thompson I was reaching for my FBI credentials, I spoke slowly and clearly, Lisa testified. I've been in law enforcement for 23 years. I know how to interact with police officers safely. Lisa's voice caught slightly as she described the moment David drew his weapon. I saw the gun pointed at my face, and I knew that my life was in his hands. I thought about my daughter, about whether I would ever see her again. I followed every instruction perfectly because I was afraid that one wrong move might be my last. The defense's cross-examination was respectful but pointed. Janet Murphy questioned whether Lisa had moved too quickly when reaching for her credentials, whether her identification as FBI had been clear enough. Director Martinez, you understand that police officers face dangers every day that most people can't imagine? Janet asked. Of course I do, Lisa replied. I've been in dangerous situations myself, but this wasn't one of them. I was completely cooperative and posed no threat whatsoever. But Officer Thompson didn't know that at the time, did he? Lisa paused before answering. Officer Thompson chose not to listen when I identified myself. He chose to escalate instead of de-escalate. Those were conscious decisions, not split-second reactions. The prosecution's final witness was Agent Michael Rivera, who had led the investigation. He walked the jury through all the evidence they had gathered about David's pattern of behavior and the department's failure to address it. We found evidence of at least 5 similar incidents over the past 7 years, Agent Rivera testified. In each case, Officer Thompson used excessive force during traffic stops, and in each case the department either covered it up or failed to properly investigate. During closing arguments, Prosecutor Adams was direct and emotional. David Thompson had a badge and a gun, and he used them to intimidate innocent people. The evidence shows a clear pattern of abuse that the police department enabled and covered. It's time to hold him accountable. Defense attorney Murphy made one final plea for understanding. Officer Thompson made a mistake, but it wasn't a criminal one. He was doing his job the way he was trained to do it. Don't destroy the life of a dedicated public servant for making a human error under pressure. The jury deliberated for 3 long days. David barely slept, pacing his hotel room and replaying every moment of the trial. Lisa tried to continue her normal routine, but she found herself checking news updates constantly. On Thursday afternoon, the jury sent word that they had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled quickly as word spread. David's hands were shaking as he stood to face the jury foreman. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant guilty. David's wife gasped audibly from the gallery. Lisa closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The months of testimony and evidence had led to this moment. On the charge of assault under color of authority, we find the defendant guilty. David's legs almost gave out beneath him. His attorney put a steadying hand on his arm. The judge banged his gavel as the courtroom erupted in whispers and movement. Within minutes, David Thompson was led away in handcuffs, just as he had handcuffed Lisa Martinez on that dark highway months earlier. His 15-year career in law enforcement was over, and his new reality as a convicted felon was just beginning. 6 weeks after the guilty verdict, David Thompson stood before Judge Patricia Hayes for sentencing. The same courtroom that had witnessed his conviction was now packed again, but the atmosphere felt different, heavier, more final. David had lost weight during the trial. His police officer confidence was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, Look of a man who had lost everything he thought he knew about himself. His wife sat in the front row with their 3 children, all of them knowing this might be the last time they would see him as a free man for months to come. Lisa Martinez was there too, sitting quietly in the back. She had chosen to attend the sentencing not out of revenge, but because she felt the victims of David's previous actions deserved to see justice done. Anthony Williams and Maria Santos had flown in specifically for this day. Judge Hayes was known for being fair but firm. She had reviewed every piece of evidence, every character letter written on David's behalf, and every victim impact statement. Her decision would send a message far beyond this courtroom. Mr. Thompson, Judge Hayes began, looking directly at David. You were entrusted with a badge and a gun to protect and serve your community. Instead, you used that authority to intimidate and harm innocent citizens. Your actions represent a betrayal of the public trust that cannot be overlooked. David's defense attorney had asked for probation and community service, arguing that David had learned from his mistakes and would never repeat them. The prosecution had requested 2 years in federal prison, pointing to the pattern of abuse and the need to deter other officers from similar behavior. The court sentences you to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation, Judge Hayes announced. During your probation, you are prohibited from working in any law enforcement capacity. David closed his eyes as the words hit him. 18 months. His children would be different people when he got out. His wife would have to explain to their neighbors why Daddy was gone. His elderly parents would have to live with the shame of having a son in prison. But Judge Hayes wasn't finished. Mr. Thompson, I hope you use your time in prison to reflect on the harm you've caused, not just to Director Martinez, but to all the citizens who trusted you to protect them. Your case will be studied in police academies and law schools for years to come. Let it serve as a lesson about what happens when officers forget they are servants, not rulers. The marshals approached to take David into custody. He turned to look at his family one last time, mouthing "I love you" to his wife before the handcuffs clicked into place. His teenage daughter was crying openly. His 2 younger sons didn't fully understand what was happening, but they knew their father was going away. Lisa Martinez watched David being led away and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Justice had been served, but she took no pleasure in seeing a family destroyed. She thought about the systemic changes that needed to happen to prevent future David Thompsons from getting to this point. Within days of the sentencing, Lisa was on Capitol Hill meeting with senators and representatives from both parties. The viral video and high-profile trial had created a rare moment of bipartisan agreement that police reform was needed. Senator Robert Chen, who chaired the Judiciary Committee, had been following the case closely. Director Martinez, what specific changes do you think would prevent incidents like this from happening again? Lisa had prepared extensively for these meetings. Senator, we need federal oversight of police departments that show patterns of civil rights violations. We need mandatory reporting of excessive force complaints, and we need to end the practice of settling these cases quietly without proper investigation. The legislation that emerged was called the Law Enforcement Accountability Act. It required police departments to report all use of force incidents to a federal database. It mandated that officers with multiple complaints receive additional training or be removed from duty. Most importantly, it provided federal funding to departments that implemented comprehensive reform programs. Lisa also established a joint task force between the FBI and local police departments to improve communication and training. The goal was to prevent the kind of miscommunication that had led to her own traumatic experience. The first meeting of the task force took place in a conference room at FBI headquarters. Police chiefs from around the country sat alongside federal agents, many of them uncomfortable with the scrutiny their departments were now under. We're not here to blame anyone, Lisa told the group. We're here to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. Police officers and federal agents are on the same side. We need to act like it. Chief Robert Williams, who had been forced to resign after the investigation into his department, was replaced by Chief Angela Rodriguez. She was younger, more progressive, and committed to cleaning house. One of her first acts was to implement mandatory de-escalation training for all officers. Every traffic stop should end with everyone going home safely, Chief Rodriguez told her officers during a department meeting. That includes the people we stop and the officers doing the stopping. Officer Thompson forgot that, and it cost him everything. Meanwhile, David was adjusting to life in federal prison. He was housed in a minimum security facility with other white-collar criminals and non-violent offenders. Most of his fellow inmates were there for financial crimes or drug possession. Very few were former police officers. The first few months were the hardest. David had to learn a completely different way of living. No badge, no authority, no respect from others. He was just another inmate number in an orange jumpsuit. But something unexpected happened as the months passed. David began to see his actions from a different perspective. He started reading books about civil rights and police reform. He began attending group therapy sessions where inmates discussed their crimes and their impact on victims. I always told myself I was protecting people, David said during one group session. But I was really just protecting myself. I was so afraid of being hurt that I ended up hurting innocent people instead. David's family visited him every other weekend. His wife had found a job as a secretary to help pay the bills. His children were doing better in school now that the initial media attention had died down, but they still faced occasional taunts from classmates. "Daddy, when you come home, will you be a police officer again?" his youngest son asked during one visit. David shook his head. "No, buddy. Daddy can't be a police officer anymore, but maybe I can find a different way to help people." Lisa's reform efforts were gaining momentum across the country. The Law Enforcement Accountability Act passed both houses of Congress with strong bipartisan support. President Biden signed it into law exactly 1 year after the traffic stop that started it all. This legislation honors not just Director Martinez's experience, but every citizen who has faced police misconduct, the president said during the signing ceremony. It ensures that law enforcement officers are held to the highest standards of conduct and accountability. Police departments around the country began implementing the new requirements. Some resisted, but others embraced the changes. Training programs were updated to emphasize de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. Body cameras became mandatory for all traffic stops. Complaint procedures were streamlined and made more transparent. Anthony Williams, who had been David's first victim, was now working with community organizations to educate young people about their rights during police encounters. "What happened to me 7 years ago shouldn't happen to anyone," he told groups of high school students. "But if it does, you have the right to file a complaint and be heard." Maria Santos had returned to nursing but also volunteered with a legal aid organization that helped police misconduct victims navigate the complaint process. "For too long, people like me just accepted what happened to us," she said. "Now we know we can fight back." After serving 15 months of his 18-month sentence, David was released for good behavior. He walked out of prison to find a world that had changed dramatically. Police reform was no longer a fringe issue but a mainstream political priority. Body cameras were everywhere. Officers received extensive training on interacting with citizens respectfully. David's family had waited for him, but their relationships had been forever altered. His marriage survived, but it required counseling and hard work. His children had learned to live without him and were cautious about trusting him again. "I know I can't undo what I did," David told his wife on his first night home. "But I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." David found work as a counselor at a halfway house for former inmates. His experience as both a police officer and a convicted felon gave him a unique perspective on the criminal justice system. He began speaking at police academies about the consequences of excessive force. "I thought the badge made me better than everyone else," David would tell young officers, "but the badge is supposed to make you serve everyone else. Don't make my mistake." Lisa continued her work as FBI director for 3 more years before retiring to spend more time with her family. Her daughter had graduated from college and was now in law school, inspired by her mother's fight for justice. "Mom, do you ever regret what happened that night?" her daughter asked during one of their weekly dinners. Lisa thought about the question carefully. "I regret that it had to happen. I regret the trauma and the pain it caused for everyone involved, but I don't regret the changes that came from it. If my experience helps prevent other people from going through the same thing, then something good came from something terrible. The dashcam video that had started it all was now shown in police academies across the country as an example of what not to do. New officers studied every moment of the encounter, learning how a routine traffic stop could go so wrong so quickly. David and Lisa never spoke to each other after the trial, but their lives remained connected by the changes they had both helped create. David's conviction became a landmark case in police accountability law. Lisa's reform efforts became a model for other federal agencies. Years later, statistics would show that police misconduct complaints had decreased significantly in departments that implemented the new training and oversight requirements. Traffic stop fatalities dropped as officers learned better de-escalation techniques. The culture of law enforcement was slowly but steadily changing. 2 lives had been forever altered by those crucial minutes on a dark highway. But from there, shared trauma came meaningful progress toward a more just and accountable system of law enforcement. The pain they endured had not been in vain.